The sea is 17 miles wide. At night, on the Sea of Galilee, storms come without warning. The lake sits 600 feet below sea level, ringed by hills that funnel cold northern air straight down onto the water. Fishermen who had worked that lake since childhood knew what a bad storm felt like. And the men in this boat knew. This one was going to kill them. Waves were crashing over the sides. The boat was filling. 4 of the 12 men on board were professional fishermen who had spent their lives on this water, and they were terrified. They scrambled to the back of the boat. Jesus was asleep, not resting fitfully, not dozing between anxious glances at the sky. Asleep, on a cushion, in the middle of what his disciples believed was the last night of their lives. They shook him awake. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He stood up. In a boat, in a storm. And he spoke to the wind and the waves the way you would speak to a dog that would not stop barking. 2 words in the original Aramaic: Siopa, Pephistizo. Be quiet. Be still. And the sea went flat. Not slowly. Not over the next 30 minutes as the storm passed. Immediately. The Greek word is euthys, instantly, at once. The kind of calm that does not follow a storm. The kind of calm that makes experienced sailors look at each other and say something they could not quite explain. "Who is this?" they asked. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." Good question. That is the question every single miracle of Jesus is designed to make you ask. Not, did this really happen? But, if it did happen, who is doing this? And why? One day, somewhere in the middle of his ministry, Jesus stood outside a sealed tomb in Bethany and said the name of a man who had been dead for 4 days. We will get to that moment, but not yet. This is not a collection of religious legends. This is not a list of ancient superstitions. This is not a feel-good story about a nice man who helped people who needed it. This is a systematic record of interventions that broke every known law of nature, documented by eyewitnesses, disputed even by enemies who never denied they happened, and still completely unexplained by any natural framework 2,000 years later. The Greek word for miracle in the New Testament is semeion. It means sign. Not magic trick. Not power display. Sign. As in, something that points to something else. Every miracle Jesus performed was pointing at the same thing. This is what it was pointing at. He performed his first miracle at a wedding. That detail alone should tell you something. Not at the temple. Not in front of the Sanhedrin. Not on a hilltop with a crowd of thousands watching. At a wedding in a small town in Galilee called Cana. The wine had run out, which in the ancient Near East was not merely an embarrassment. Running out of wine at a wedding was a social catastrophe. It reflected on the family for years. Mary, his mother, found him and told him what happened. His answer, translated literally from the Greek, is jarring. "Woman, what is this to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." It sounds cold. It is not. In the Greek idiom of the day, it is a formal, respectful separation of jurisdiction. A son telling his mother, "This is not how I operate. Not yet." And yet. Mary turned to the servants and said, "Do whatever he tells you." 6 stone water jars stood nearby, each holding the 20 to 30 gallons, jars used for Jewish purification rituals. Jesus told the servants to fill them to the brim. They did. Then he told them to draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. The master tasted it. He pulled the groom aside. "Everyone brings out the choice wine first," he said, "and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." 180 gallons of the finest wine from water in an instant at a party, because a mother asked. Here is what most people miss about that first miracle. Jesus did not perform it to prove anything. No crowd was watching. The master of the banquet did not know where the wine came from. Only the servants knew. 6 ordinary people who were told to do something that made no sense and did it anyway, and they were the only witnesses. The first sign was quiet, private, impossibly generous. And it happened because someone needed it. Pay attention to who he chose to help. It matters. Not every miracle was quiet. A Roman centurion came to him in Capernaum. A centurion commanded 100 soldiers. He was not Jewish. He had no ancestral claim on the God of Israel. And his servant, a slave, a person of no standing in the ancient world, was sick, paralyzed, in terrible pain. The centurion said, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed." Jesus stopped. He looked at the people following him, Jewish crowds who had been walking with him for days, and he said, "Truly, I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith." He said the word. The servant was healed at that exact moment, miles away, without Jesus being present. A Roman soldier slave, not one of God's chosen people, not a religious man, not someone with the right genealogy or the right prayers. Healed because of faith so simple, it embarrassed the religious establishment standing right next to Jesus. Miracle number 2. Same pattern, different person, same point being made. He touched a leper next. A man declared ritually unclean by the law, banned from community, required to call out, "Unclean, unclean," to warn approaching strangers. The law did not permit physical contact with a leper. Jesus reached out his hand and touched him before healing him. The healing could have happened from a distance. He had just done that with the centurion's servant. He chose to touch first, because the man had not been touched in years, because the healing of the body matters, and so does the healing of the isolation. Here is the part nobody tells you about the miracles of Jesus. The people he healed were almost never the people you expected. Not the powerful, not the prominent, not the ones who had worked their way to the front of the line. A Roman soldier's slave, a leper nobody would touch, a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years, who had spent everything she had on doctors who could not help her, who reached through a crowd and touched the hem of his robe because she had run out of options. He felt power leave him. He stopped and turned around. In the middle of a pressing crowd, he asked who had touched him. His disciples thought the question was absurd. Everyone was touching him. But he waited, and the woman came forward, trembling, expecting anger, expecting to be sent away. He called her daughter. The only time in all 4 Gospels that Jesus uses that word for an individual woman. Not her name. Daughter. Your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Every miracle is pointing at the same thing. If you are still watching, and I hope you are, you have seen water become wine at a party nobody important attended, a slave healed at a distance because of his master's faith, a leper touched before he was cured, and a woman with nothing left called daughter by the man who changed everything. Subscribe before we go further. Hit that bell, because what he did on a hillside with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish is the miracle that had the most witnesses of any event in the ancient world. And what it means is something nobody seems to talk about. 5,000 men. That count does not include women and children. Historians estimate the crowd that day was somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 people. On a hillside, at the end of the day, with no food vendors, with no nearby town large enough to supply them. Philip, one of the disciples, did the math quickly. 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough to give each person even a small piece. That was 8 months of wages. They did not have it anyway. A boy was there, a child, standing in a crowd of thousands with his lunch. 5 small barley loaves, the bread of the poor, not the good wheat bread, and 2 small fish. Andrew mentioned him to Jesus with the kind of helpless embarrassment you feel when the answer you are offering is obviously not enough. But what are these among so many? Jesus took them. He gave thanks. He broke the bread. He gave it to the disciples to distribute. And they distributed. And they kept distributing. Until 15,000 people had eaten. Not a bite, not a taste, but enough that 12 baskets of broken pieces were collected afterward. 12 baskets. 1 for each disciple. As if the leftovers were a message. There is always more than you think. The crowd tried to make him king by force the next morning. He withdrew. He was not interested in the kind of kingdom they were imagining. The miracle was not about political power. The miracle was about this. A child offered what he had. Jesus took it. And it became more than enough for everyone. Stay with me, because what happened later that same night is just as remarkable. The disciples were crossing the lake by boat. Jesus had sent them ahead while he went up a mountain to pray alone. Somewhere between 3 and 6 in the morning, the 4th watch of the night, they saw something on the water. Moving toward them, in the middle of the lake. They screamed. They thought it was a ghost. "Take courage," Jesus said. "It is I. Don't be afraid." Peter, who was always Peter, called out, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." Jesus said one word, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat, and he walked on water. For a few seconds, or a few feet, or a few steps, the text does not tell us how far. Peter walked on the surface of the Sea of Galilee. Then he noticed the wind. He looked away from Jesus. He sank. The miracle is not that Peter walked on water. The miracle is that Jesus was there at all, that he came to them in the dark, in the middle of a crossing they were struggling through alone, when they thought he was somewhere else entirely. He found them where they were. He always does. There is one miracle that is different from all the others. Most miracles happened in a moment. A word spoken, a hand extended, a touch. This one had stages. A blind man came to Jesus in Bethsaida. Jesus took him by the hand, led him outside the village, spit on his eyes, and placed his hands on him. Then he asked, "Do you see anything?" The man looked up. "I see people. They look like trees, walking around." "Not yet." Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again, and the man's sight was fully restored. Why 2 stages? Why not instantly, the way it always happened? Scholars have offered explanations. But here is what I find most honest about that question. We do not know. And the fact that the text records it this way, imperfect first, complete second, tells you the gospel writers were not editing for the sake of a perfect story. They wrote what happened. Sometimes healing comes in stages. Sometimes the first touch gives you trees instead of faces. And the answer is not to walk away. The answer is to let him finish. The man born blind in Jerusalem is different again. He had not been blind since illness or injury. He had never seen. From birth, his world was darkness. The disciples, when they saw him, asked a theological question. "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents?" Jesus dismissed the entire frame. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. This happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. He spit on the ground, made mud from the dust, placed it on the man's eyes, and told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. The man went. The man washed. The man came home, seeing. Neighbors argued about whether it was even the same person. He kept telling them, "I am the man." They brought him to the Pharisees. The Pharisees argued about whether a healing on the Sabbath could come from God. They called his parents. They interrogated the man a second time. He gave the best answer of anyone in the Gospel of John. "I was blind, but now I see." 8 words. That is the whole theology. And then we get to Lazarus. Here is what most people miss about the raising of Lazarus. It was not a surprise. Jesus received word that his friend was sick, and he deliberately waited 2 days before going. Not because he did not care, because he was waiting for something specific. He told his disciples plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe." 4 days. By the time Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had been in the tomb 4 days. This matters in the Jewish tradition of the 1st century. There was a belief that the soul hovered near the body for 3 days after death. 4 days was beyond any ambiguity, beyond any possibility of mistake, beyond any natural explanation. Mary fell at his feet when she saw him. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." She was not wrong. He could have prevented it. He chose not to. And instead of explaining the theology, instead of delivering a lecture about resurrection and sovereignty, he looked at her grief, and he wept. The Greek word is edakresin. He shed tears. The crowd watching said, "See how he loved him." And then, 2 sentences later, we see the only emotion in all 4 Gospels where Jesus is described as deeply troubled or indignant in his spirit. The Greek is embryomai, a word that implies something like anger or righteous fury before he approached the tomb. He was not weeping because Lazarus was beyond help. He was not troubled because the situation was hopeless. He was troubled because of what death is, what it does to the people left behind, what it has done to every human being since the garden. He went to the tomb. He told them to roll away the stone. Martha, practical, organized, honest, said what anyone would say. "Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Jesus looked at her. "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" They rolled the stone away. He prayed, publicly, loudly, so that the crowd would know what was about to happen and why. And then he called into the dark, "Lazarus, come out." A dead man walked out of his own tomb, still wrapped in burial strips, cloth over his face. Jesus told the people standing there to unwrap him and let him go. Here is what that miracle cost. The religious council met the next day, not to investigate whether it had really happened, to decide how to respond to the fact that it had. The Gospel of John records their exact words. "If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him." And from that day, they plotted to kill him. The miracle that most clearly showed who Jesus was, the one with the most witnesses, the most documentation, the most impossible circumstances, was the miracle that sealed the decision to execute him. The sign pointing at something greater cost him everything. Here is what I want you to carry from all of this. The first thing is about the selection. Jesus did not heal everyone. There were sick people in Judea and Galilee that he passed on the road who stayed sick. The miracles were not a universal medical program. They were signs, each one chosen with surgical precision to reveal something specific about who he was and what his kingdom looked like. The leper he touched first told you, "No one is untouchable." The centurion's servant told you, "Faith outside the expected borders counts." The woman he called daughter told you, "Even when you have run out of everything, you are not forgotten." The second thing is about the pattern. Josephus, the Jewish historian writing in the 1st century, recorded that Jesus was a doer of wonderful works. Celsus, the Roman philosopher who wrote against Christianity, and whose work survives only in Origen's rebuttals, never disputed that the miracles happened. He disputed the source. The argument from the very beginning was never, "These things did not occur." It was always, "But who was doing them, and why?" The third thing is the one I want you to sit with. Every miracle of Jesus was pointing at the same moment, the one where the miracle workers would himself enter a tomb, the one where no one was standing outside calling his name, the one where the stone was sealed and the guards were posted, and the people who loved him were hiding behind locked doors, certain that the story was over. And then, 3 days later, he did for himself what he had done for Lazarus. Except this time, there was no one there to tell him to come out, no voice calling from outside, no crowd watching, no disciples present, just a sealed tomb in a garden at dawn, and an empty burial cloth, folded, left behind, as if whoever left it was in no hurry. The calming of the storm, the wine at the wedding, the blind man seeing, the dead man walking, every sign was pointing here, to the moment when death itself found out it was not, in the end, the strongest thing in the room. Which miracle in this story hit you hardest? The one at the wedding The one on the water, or the one in the tomb? Tell me below. I read every single one.